If you've ever felt trapped in a binge spiral, a time where you just feel like you can't stop eating, that awful feeling when one bite or just a little bit turns into 1,000 and you can't seem to stop, this episode is for you. Today, I'm going to share 3 powerful questions that can interrupt the spiral, one for each stage, before you eat, while you're eating, and after. But first, we need to talk about what it really means to stop a spiral and how actual change works in your brain. Welcome to Binge Eating Breakthrough, the podcast to help you stop feeling out of control around food and build trust with your body. If you've tried everything but still feel stuck, you're not alone. I've been there too. I'm Jane Pilger, and I'm here to help you see binge eating in a new way so you can finally break free. Each week, you'll get the tools and insights to create peace with food and your body. Your breakthrough starts now. Hello, trusted listener. I consider you a trusted listener because I trust that you're here for real solutions, not quick fixes. I trust that you understand that change takes time and that you're willing to do the work even when it feels hard. And most importantly, I trust that you're ready to approach yourself with curiosity instead of criticism. Now, today we're going to talk about something that might sound too good to be true. The one question that stops a binge spiral in its tracks. Actually, it's really 3 questions that we're going to talk about. One for before you eat, one for while you're eating, and one for after. Now, you might be wondering why I called this episode The One Question when I'm really sharing 3. Here's why. These 3 questions are all expressions of the same underlying practice, bringing curiosity to your experience instead of criticism. They're all invitations to connect with yourself instead of disconnecting. And one of them is really the foundational question that I use constantly in my work. The other 2 are powerful supports for different moments in the spiral. So while you're getting 3 questions today, they're all part of one essential practice: choosing awareness over autopilot. But before we dive into those questions, I want to address the other part of the title of this episode. When you hear stops a binge spiral in its tracks, it might sound like I'm promising you a magic bullet. Like if you just ask yourself this one question, you'll never binge again. And I want to be really honest with you right now. That is not what I'm saying. But here's what I am saying. These questions have the power to interrupt your automatic patterns. They create a pause. They bring awareness. They open up the possibility of responding differently. But here's the thing about change. It does not happen overnight, and it doesn't happen in a straight line. Think about how a binge spiral works. You've created a well-worn neural pathway in your brain. It's like a path through the forest that you have walked so many times that it's become the easiest route to take. Stress happens. An emotion comes up. You see a trigger food, and boom, your brain automatically takes that familiar path without you even consciously choosing it. Now, when you start asking yourself these questions, you're beginning to create a new path through the forest. The first time you do it, you might still end up taking the old path, and that's okay. The fact that you ask the question at all means that you're clearing brush. You're starting to forge a new route. The second time, maybe you pause for a moment before taking the old path. That pause is progress. The third time, maybe you take a few steps on the new path before you go back to the old one. Still progress. And over time, with repetition and practice, the new path becomes clearer, easier to find, more automatic. The old path starts to grow over with weeds because you're not using it as much. This is literally how neural pathways work in your brain. This is how lasting change happens. So when I say these questions can stop a binge spiral in its tracks, I mean they interrupt the automatic pattern. Sometimes that interruption will be enough to completely shift your behavior in that moment, and sometimes it won't. Both outcomes are part of the change process. The key is that you're building awareness. You're practicing a new response and you're creating new neural pathways. That is the real work of change. Now, let me also say this. Asking yourself these questions is the change. Even if you ask the question and still binge, you have done something different. You've brought consciousness to an unconscious pattern. You've chosen curiosity over autopilot. That matters. That counts. That is progress. So as we go through these questions today, I don't want you to hear them as rules you must follow perfectly or tools that will fix everything immediately. I want you to hear them as invitations to bring awareness to your experience, to connect with yourself, and to practice responding in a new way. All right, let's dive into our 3 questions. So the first question, then this is something that you can ask yourself before you eat. Here's the question. What is really going on? This is the question to ask yourself before you eat, when you first notice that urge, that craving coming up. Maybe you're standing in front of the pantry. Maybe you're thinking about food, even though you just ate. Maybe you're on your way to the drive-thru or reaching for the delivery app on your phone. In that moment, before you take action, pause and ask yourself, what's really going on? This question is so simple, yet so powerful because it creates space. It interrupts the automatic response of, I want food, so I should eat. It invites you to look underneath the hood. What's really going on might be physical hunger. Great, that's information. Food is probably going to be a helpful response to that. But what's really going on might be something else entirely. Maybe you're stressed about a work deadline. Maybe you're lonely. Maybe you're bored or anxious or overwhelmed. Maybe you just had a difficult conversation and your nervous system is activated. Maybe you're avoiding something you don't want to do. Here's what I love about this question. It doesn't assume anything. It doesn't say, you're emotional eating or you shouldn't want food right now. You're not even hungry. It's a completely neutral question. It just asks you to get curious about your experience. And sometimes the answer will surprise you. I can't tell you how many times I've paused to ask myself, what's really going on? And realized something I had no conscious awareness of. Oh, I'm actually really tired. Oh, I'm feeling really anxious about that thing tomorrow. I'm feeling disconnected and I want to feel close to someone. The awareness itself is valuable, regardless of what you do next. Because even if you do decide to eat, you're doing it with consciousness instead of unconsciousness. You're choosing it instead of feeling at the mercy of it. And it makes all the difference. Now, here's what I often hear from people. But Jane, what if I ask myself what's really going on and I don't know? What if the answer isn't clear? That's completely okay and quite honestly, very normal, especially when you first start asking the question. Sometimes the answer isn't immediately obvious. Sometimes all you know is that something feels off, but you can't quite name it. That is still useful information. You can even say to yourself, I don't know what's going on, but something is. That level of awareness is still creating a pause, still interrupting the automatic pattern. You might also find that the answer changes once you start paying attention. You might think, oh, I'm just tired. But as you sit with it for a moment, you realize there's also some anxiety there or some sadness. That's the beauty of this question. It opens the door to deeper self-awareness. And remember, this question isn't about stopping yourself from eating. It's about understanding what you're experiencing so you can respond in a way that actually serves you. If you're physically hungry, food serves you. If you're emotionally dysregulated, food might provide temporary comfort, but it probably won't resolve what's actually going on. And that's okay. You get to choose, but at least now you are choosing consciously. All right, let's move on to the second question. This is what you can ask while you're already eating. Let's say you notice you're already eating and you notice that you're starting to spiral. Here's the question. Can I stay present with myself right now? Maybe you intended to have a normal amount of food and now you're reaching for more and more. Maybe you were like, oh, just a little bit, just one more bite, just one more thing. Maybe you're eating quickly and barely tasting it. Maybe you can feel yourself disconnecting, going into that autopilot state where you're not really aware of what you're doing. Where I used to say is like turning the lights off on myself. So in that moment, the question brings you back. Can I stay present with myself right now? Now, I want to be clear about something. The answer to this question might be no. You might ask yourself, can I stay present? And realize, nope, you can't. Not right now. And that's okay. The act of asking the question still matters. It still creates a moment of awareness. It still interrupts the complete unconsciousness of the spiral. But sometimes, maybe not the first time, maybe not the second time, but eventually you will ask yourself this question and the answer will be yes. Yes, I can stay here. Yes, I can stay connected to myself. Yes, I can keep my awareness online instead of checking out. What does it mean to stay present with yourself? It means continuing to notice what you're experiencing. It means staying in your body instead of dissociating. It means being aware of the food that you're eating, the taste, the texture, how it feels in your body. It means noticing your emotions without trying to push them away or numb them out. This is probably the hardest of the three questions because it requires you to be with discomfort. When we're in the middle of a binge spiral, there's often a lot of uncomfortable emotions swirling around. Anxiety, shame, sadness, anger, overwhelm. The binge is often an attempt to escape those feelings, to not be present with them. So when you ask yourself, can I stay present with myself right now? What you're really asking is, can I be with what I'm feeling instead of trying to escape it through food? And here is what is both challenging and beautiful about this question. Staying present doesn't mean you have to stop eating. You might stay present and continue eating. But when you are present, the quality of your eating changes. You're no longer in that frenzied, out of control state. You're there with yourself. You're making conscious choices, even if those choices include continuing to eat. I'll give you an example from my own life. There was a time I was going through something really difficult, and I found myself in the middle of eating in a way that didn't feel good to me. I was in that familiar spiral, eating quickly, barely tasting the food, feeling that sense of being out of control, really about to turn the lights off. And I asked myself this question: can I stay present with myself right now? And the answer was yes. Not easily, but yes. So I slowed down. I started noticing the food I was eating. I noticed the emotions that were there. Sadness, fear, loneliness. I stayed with all of it. And you know what happened? I didn't immediately stop eating, but I did slow down significantly. I did taste my food. And after a little while, I naturally stopped because I realized the food wasn't actually giving me what I needed. I needed to cry. I needed to call a friend. I needed to get what was in my head out. And I was able to do those things because I stayed present enough to notice them. Had I not answered the question, I would have kept eating to the point of pain until I could not eat anymore. And all of that other stuff would have been there, buried underneath the shame and the frustration and the physical discomfort of the binge. This is the power of this question. It brings you back to yourself. And when you're connected to yourself, you can respond to what you actually need instead of just running on autopilot. All right, so we have the question for before, what's really going on? The question for during, can I stay present with myself right now? And the question for after, which is the foundational question, how does this make sense? This is the question to ask yourself after a binge, after you've eaten in a way you don't prefer or that doesn't feel good to you. After you're in that post-binge state that often feels full of shame and regret. This is the most important question of the three, and it's the one I ask constantly in my coaching work. When someone tells me about their struggles with food, I'm always looking for how it makes sense, because it always does. There is always a reason behind our eating patterns. Always. You're binge eating, you're eating more than you want, you're feeling out of control without food. It's not random. It's not a character flaw. It's not evidence that you're broken or that something is wrong with you. It's a signal. It's information. It's your system's way of trying to cope with something, to manage something, to communicate something. If you've been listening for a while, you know that I like to think of binges as lights on the dashboard of your car. When a warning light comes on in your car, you don't get angry at the light. You don't shame the light or try to ignore it. You understand that the light is trying to tell you something important. Something is going on under the hood that needs attention. The light itself isn't the problem. It's information pointing you toward the actual problem. And that's what binges are. They're lights on your dashboard, telling you there's something going on under the hood that needs your attention. So after a binge, instead of immediately going into shame and judgment, I can't believe I did that again. What's wrong with me? I'm so weak. I'm never going to figure this out. You ask a different question. How does this make sense? How does it make sense that you binged in this particular moment? How does it make sense that you just ate way more food than you wanted to? What was happening before? What were you feeling? What were you thinking? What was going on in your life, your day, your body? Maybe you binged after a really stressful day at work. How does that make sense? Well, your nervous system was activated all day. You were in fight or flight mode. Food is one of the ways your body knows how to come back to a sense of calm and safety. That makes sense. Maybe you binged after restricting your food all day. How does that make sense? Your body was in deprivation mode, and it responded by driving you to eat as much as possible to make up for the restriction and protect against future deprivation. That makes sense. Maybe you ate after receiving criticism from someone. How does that make sense? The criticism activated feelings of not being good enough, of shame, and food became a way to soothe those painful feelings. That makes sense. Maybe you ate when you were actually having a good day and nothing bad happened. How does that make sense? Maybe joy or positive emotions feel unsafe to you. Maybe you've learned to self-sabotage when things are going well. Maybe you're just looking and waiting for the other shoe to drop. Maybe your nervous system can't tolerate sustained positive emotion yet. That makes sense. Do you see how this works? When you ask, how does this make sense? You move from judgment to curiosity. You move from shame to understanding. And most importantly, you get information that can help you address what is actually going on. Because here's the thing. If you don't understand why you're binging, you can't address it effectively. You will just keep trying to white knuckle your way through with willpower, or you'll try another diet, or you'll beat yourself up thinking that will somehow motivate you to change. None of those approaches work because they don't address the root cause. But when you ask, how does this make sense? And you find the answer, oh, I binged because I was incredibly stressed and I didn't have any other tools to regulate my nervous system. Now you have something to work with. Now you can start developing other nervous system regulation tools. You can start addressing the actual problem. This question also does something else that's incredibly powerful. It prevents the shame spiral. When you're asking, how does this make sense? You literally cannot be in shame at the same time. Curiosity and shame are incompatible. You can't be genuinely curious about your experience and simultaneously judging yourself for it. And breaking that shame spiral is crucial because shame is one of the primary drivers of binge eating. You binge, you feel shame. The shame makes you want to escape your feelings, so you binge again. It's a vicious cycle. How does this make sense interrupts that cycle by replacing shame with understanding. I like to think about shame and judgment as the 50-pound weight that ends up on the hood of your car. It prevents you from even getting under the hood to see what is causing that light to come on in the first place. Now, I want to acknowledge this question can be hard to ask in the immediate aftermath of a binge. Sometimes the shame is too strong. The emotions are too raw and you are not ready to be curious yet. And that is okay. You can come back to this question later, a few hours later, the next day, in a conversation with your coach or your therapist, whenever you're ready. The important thing is that you do eventually ask, because every binge, every moment with food has information for you. Every binge makes sense when you understand the context. And when you can see how it makes sense, you can start to address what's actually driving the behavior. So those are your 3 questions. What's really going on before you eat? Can I stay present with myself right now while you are eating? And how does this make sense after? Each question serves a different purpose, meets you at a different stage of the spiral, but they all have the same foundation: curiosity, presence, and self-compassion. These questions are not about perfection. They're not about getting it right every time. They're about practicing a new way of relating to yourself and your food struggles. They're about building those new neural pathways we talked about at the beginning of the episode. Some days you'll remember to ask these questions and it will make a huge difference. Some days you'll remember to ask, but you'll binge anyway. And some days you won't remember to ask until it's all over. And all of those days are part of the change process. What matters is that you keep practicing. You keep coming back to these questions. You keep choosing curiosity over criticism, because that is how real, lasting change happens. Not through perfection, but through consistent, compassionate practice. And if you find that you're struggling to ask yourself these questions, or you ask them but you can't find the answers, or you know the answers but you're not sure what to do with that information, that is what coaching is for. This is exactly the kind of work I do with my clients. I help them learn to ask these questions, to understand their answers, and to develop new responses that actually address what's going on underneath the food struggles. Sometimes you can't figure out how it makes sense or why it makes sense on your own. That's where having somebody else who can come in and see what you can't see for yourself can literally change everything. Because remember, it is not about the food. It's about what's happening under the hood. And when you can understand what's happening under the hood, you can finally address it in a way that creates real and lasting change. So this week, I invite you to experiment with these questions. Try them out. See what you notice. There is no right or wrong way to do this. There's just your experience and your willingness to bring curiosity to it. Because when you understand what's happening with your eating behaviors and how they make sense, you can finally start to heal what's underneath. That's what I have for you today. I'll see you next week. If you've been trying to stop binge eating and nothing has worked, there's a reason. I created the Binge Breakthrough mini-series to help you finally understand what's driving your binge eating beneath the surface so that you can actually start to change it. Each video is short and they're designed to give you the clarity and direction you've been missing so you can stop feeling stuck and start finding your way out. Start watching now at janepilger.com/mini. That's janepilger.com/mini. MINI.